I don't have my glasses on. But
let's get started. You can just get going.
is it running?
I think so.
Does it seem to be changing numbers?
17, 18.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. I'm Dr. Bryan Austill. I'm glad to be able to be here for the second of three educational opportunities on conflict resolution. And my claim to fame is I'm Pastor Carey's husband, Bryan. So I wanted to start out today by just giving those of you who were here last week a chance to ask questions about the topics of our conversation last week, and try to respond to those. And then I'll launch into way more information than you'll probably want today, but I'll try to squeeze a lot in as I did last week as well. So anybody here who has questions from last week to start with?
My question is about assertiveness. I mean, what difference does it make? I can see how it could make a difference to me being assertive. I feel relieved. I've said the right thing, so on. But what difference does it make to the person who I'm having a conflict with?
Well, it's a good question, as pastors ask good questions. And
you avoided conflict there.
yeah, avoided conflict there. A little praise goes a long way. First of all, yes, it does some things for yourself in that you're not choosing to lose. You're seeking a way to win without causing the other person to lose. So it does something for them in that you're reassuring them that you're interested in a win-win solution, so that you're interested in not only taking care of your own needs, but also taking care of theirs. And so that as an outcome is reassuring to people, and it cuts down on the fear that is involved in conflict resolution. We tend to have anxiety that we're going to lose in some way, and that can cause us to operate either by choosing to lose, giving up our own self-interest, or choosing to win, trying to make sure that the other person doesn't get their self-interest taken care of. So when we become more assertive and we're looking for that win-win solution, it reduces anxiety. It also, for those of us who are in couple relationships, is a real gift to our partners because it allows them to know how to please us. People who are passive tend to be quiet about what they want, and I used an example last week. I said, if Carrie says to me afterward, where would you like to go for lunch? And she said, and I say, oh, anything is fine, don't worry about me. And then she chooses Italian, and I really want Mexican. And she's failed me again. And I can be angry with her about it. If I instead am clear with her about what it is that I want, I'd really love some Mexican food today, then it's a gift to her because she has an idea of how to please me. We sometimes think that by speaking up about our own needs, we're being selfish or we're creating a problem for the other person. But in fact, we're giving them clarity about what it is that they can do that will please us. And our lovers would love to be able to succeed at caring for us. That's what they're in this for, so that we're happy with them about what they're giving us. And then we get back to that flow of giving each other the things that make relationships feel good and build feelings of love. So, does that answer the question for you? Okay. Any other questions from last week? They're a very silent, passive, or cooperative, nice group of people. I don't know. Yes?
I just have a thought that keeps coming up last week and this week. I remember our congregational meeting where we were deciding last July or August how to approach the call for the senior pastor, and person after person after person was getting up and talking about what maybe had frustrated them over the last year. Or there was a lot of things, and about, I don't know, I'm guessing 40 minutes went by, and I started to go, oh my gosh, this isn't going to end well. And then Pastor Chad stood up and said, this is exactly what should be happening. People should be expressing what they feel and what they need. And wow, that just calmed me down. I was like, oh, okay, this is what's supposed to be happening. So it just supports what you're saying.
Let me make a comment about that, because I think that in any kind of conflict, I'll pick an example when we're doing parenting. Any kind of conflict, we tend to point out what we don't like. I used to go into the Head Start classrooms and do evaluations in Hawaii when we lived there. And invariably there would be one little kid, little Johnny, who acted out terribly in the classroom, and the teacher was constantly focused on him and his bad behavior. And it just disrupted the whole classroom. And the more attention she gave to little Johnny trying to work that out, the more little Johnny acted out, because what we pay attention to is a reward, and it increases behavior. And so I try to get people in those situations and in others in the couple relationships that I deal with in therapy to focus not so much on what they don't like, because we're really good at telling each other that, or remaining silent, but instead, in terms of this theme for today, to witness to the hope that is in you, to talk about what it is that you would like or what you hope for as an outcome. To frame it in that kind of way, to talk about our hopes rather than what we don't like, just creates an openness to conversation between people. If I say to Carrie, I hate it that you always pick that Italian restaurant, what's she going to do in response to that? She's much more likely to get defensive. You are always criticizing me. You always talk negatively about me. Why am I never good enough for you? All those kinds of defensive things, or I'll get a cross complaint. She'll tell me about something she doesn't like about me, right? But if instead I can say, I really hope that this next time we can sit down and talk about coming up with a solution for lunch that we both feel really good about. Just talking about things in terms of our hope for outcomes. Or as we sit down to have this conflict, I hope that we'll be able to, at the end of it, walk away as friends and feel good about each other. Just anything in terms of speaking about hope goes a long way to reducing conflict. Okay? All right, let me launch into today, and I hope I can squeeze some of this in. I'm going to pick two scripture passages to start out with today. The first one is an obscure piece that you probably won't have read. Those of you who are Bible scholars and read everything will probably have read it, but otherwise you probably won't have picked out this one unless you've been to seminary, where it does tend to come up occasionally. And this is from the book of Judges, and it's in chapter 12. And you'll see why this seems like a really odd passage here in just a second. And I'm going to kind of divide you up here into thirds. I'm going to have everybody on this side be one group. We're going to call you the Ephraimites. Everybody knows about the Ephraimites. We're going to call this first row here, excuse me, my glasses just broke. Be a little off here. Let's see. We're going to call this first group the Ammonites. Another group that's very well known. And then we're going to call the third group the group of Zephath.
Say that.
Zephath. We're going to give you another name in a minute. Yeah, back row, back there on that side. Zephath. Okay. So, the men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zephon and said to Zephath, "Why did you cross over and fight against the Ammonites? And didn't call us to go with you? We'll burn your house down over you." And Zephath said to them, "My people and I were engaged in conflict with the Ammonites, who oppressed us severely. But when I called you, you didn't deliver us from their hand. And when I saw that you wouldn't deliver me, I took my life in my own hand and crossed over against the Ammonites. And the Lord gave them into my hand. Why then have you come to me this day to fight against me?" Then Zephath gathered all the men of Gilead, that's your second name, the Gilead group, and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim, because they said, "You are a fugitive from Ephraim and the Gileadites in the heart of Ephraim and Manasseh." See how complicated this is. Then the Gileadites took the fords of Jordan against the Ephraimites. So you guys took the fords across the river Jordan against you guys. There's a point to all this. And whenever one of the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," and the men of Gilead would say to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" And when he said no, they said to him, "Then say Shibboleth." Never heard the word? And they asked him to say Shibboleth because he couldn't pronounce it right. Then they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan, and 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell at that time.
I love the Old Testament.
Wonderful. I'll explain why I chose this one in a little while.
Who was the judge at that time?
The judge, that's a good question. Let's see. I can tell you who followed the judge at that time, but I'm not going to find it real quickly. Sorry about that. So they give the list of, this is from the book of Judges, they give the list of the judges of Israel and who followed whom. And you'll see after this, the judges were people, actually the very next judge after this, I happen to know, had like 25 sons and had 30 sons. There we go. So Jephthah was the judge of Israel at this time, and after him Ibzan of Bethlehem. And he had 30 sons, and he married them all out to other groups outside of his community so that they would bring other people into the community. So, a little aside. But I wanted you to, we'll talk about why I chose that one here in a minute. Let me get to this next one. And the next one is the one that I didn't get to last week, and it's from Galatians chapter 5 on the fruits of the Spirit. And let me just read this section, starting in chapter 5, verses 16 on. "Live by the Spirit, I say, and do not gratify the desires of the flesh." Now you think of that as body, but listen, you'll see that the desires of the flesh are not just about body desires. "For what the flesh desires is opposed to the Spirit, and what the Spirit desires is opposed to the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to prevent you from doing what you want. But if you were led by the Spirit, you're not subject to the law. Now the works of the flesh are obvious: fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like this. I'm warning you, as I warned you before, those who do such things won't inherit the kingdom of God. By contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. And those who belong to Jesus Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, competing against one another, envying one another. So, the movement toward the fruits of the Spirit and against these things that cause all kinds of strife and breakdown of relationships. So today I want to talk a little bit about where does intense conflict come from. And I am very intimidated that I'm not going to get through all of this, but I want to get you some of it anyway. And so first of all, I want to talk about the psychological idea of displacement. Displacement means that something is going on from another place, in another relationship, and the emotions that are going on in that relationship get brought over to this relationship. Has anybody heard that term, displacement? And so displacement tends to come up and be confusing for us because we'll be involved in a conversation with somebody and suddenly they become very intense and we can't figure out what's going on because we've been having a good relationship with them or they seem pretty calm with us in the past, and then there's all of this intensity. And we tend to, if we're passive people, tend to ask the question, well, what did I do? We tend to call ourselves into question most readily if we're passive. And once we do that, we fall into the trap of thinking that other people's behavior has something to do with us. We're going to be very confused, feel very powerless, and we're going to be working to change the other person's emotional state, and that's not going to get us anywhere. We do better to try to explore, where did this intensity come from? Now, when we do that at first, the first thing that happens is people who are intense escalate even more. So when we explore it at first, we get the reaction we weren't really wanting. But if we can keep ourselves calm enough in reaction to it, we'll find that there's a reason, and probably other reasons, why people are having this level of intensity. If we ask them, what else is going on that brings a strong amount of emotion to this for you? Or are there other things going on in your world these days that are bringing up similar kinds of feelings? Those are good therapeutic kinds of questions, but they do work in our personal relationships as well if we can keep ourselves calm. People will tell us about this. If I walk in the door tonight and I meet Carrie at the door and she says to me, the example I used last week, we put ourselves in a bad light. You never clean the kitchen. If I just take it that intensity is about us, I'm maybe missing the point. If I can keep myself calm, I may have to go away and calm down, come back and have a conversation with her and say, you want to talk about the kitchen and the chore division, we can do that. We try to get ourselves calm enough to have that conversation. But if I also say, is there anything else going on in your world that's bringing up some feelings today? She might say to me, I just got off the phone to my mom with her Alzheimer's disease and it's driving me crazy. This. So we bring from other places in our lives emotions to other situations that don't have anything to do with that, but the emotion gets carried with us and gets displaced into other kinds of conflicts. So that's one place that intensity comes from. Another one is just pure biochemistry. This is the one where we just it's that time of the month, it's the week before your period, and you're just not feeling yourself, or you have got a tendency to some depression, and you bring that tendency to the environment, and people say, "What are you upset about?" Or we ask ourselves, I'm feeling really grumpy. Why am I upset? I'm upset because you just never take good care of me. Or you said something to me, didn't you, about me? We tend to take things, when we're affected by biochemistry, we take things really personally. And we assign that emotion that we're having because of our chemistry onto the situation that's right in front of us, because we're kind of meaning makers and we're trying to figure this stuff out, but we see things through that filter of the chemistry that's going on at the moment. The third one, and I want to hand out a little diagram for this one, and I'll ask you to share this one. This one's a little complicated. And so I will go through this a little bit with you. This is a diagram that comes out of the University of Minnesota. A fellow by the name of David Olson put this together. It's called the Circumplex Model of Families and Couple Relationships. A big fancy name to it. It operates, it helps to understand people who become extreme. Okay? So there are a couple of sides to this diagram. The first one that you'll see there says closeness or cohesion at the top of it. And let me describe this. Think about your growing up families on this first, and describe how this fits growing up families, couple relationships, and larger relationships. So first of all, we like to see enough connection between people in growing up families that people get a sense of security, comfort, and some sense of who they're supposed to be. They get guidance about who to be in their families. And that we would call a very connected kind of relationship. You're getting all of those things. You belong, you get security from that, get some identity about who you're supposed to be. At the same time, we like to see enough ability to become separate that people can go do their own thing with their own friends and pursue their own identities. What we don't like to see is so much connection that people are required to be with each other and like each other all of the time. We're the Johnsons, we vote for Johnson, you'll vote for Johnson. There's a forced sameness there that we call in therapy circles enmeshment. And on the other side, we don't like to see so much separateness that people are forced to be on their own whether they want to be or not. They don't get the sense of security and comfort from relationships. They don't get the guidance about who to be. They're required to be alone and independent when it's uncomfortable for them. So the over-involvement is uncomfortable for people because it's smothering, and the under-involvement is uncomfortable for people because it's abandoning. Okay? You have questions about that one real quick?
No,
Okay.
we'll just confirm.
Now, the reason I'm using this model is that the more extreme we are from balance in that, the more we grow up with extreme experiences, the more uncomfortable it is for us, the more anxious we get about closeness, distance, whether you're the same as me, whether there's too much uncertainty in a situation. So this key piece of anxiety intensifies conflict. Okay? So is this at all seeming close to anything going on in conflict for you all? Does it seem to have any connection, or does this seem like way out in left field right now? Left field, okay.
A little bit,
Yeah.
not way out, but
Yes.
a little bit.
I have a question about one that's kind of maybe before this, that's related to the bringing things from a situation. But what about situations that are from, say, your child raising that trigger things, even though, you know, that are very, they're not as clear that that's what's causing it, you know, but it will bring in
From
a
when you were a
response.
child and what was going on? Is that's what this is about? Yeah.
So you're
Yes.
saying if you're on either end of the spectrum, like
Right.
let's say the husband's on one side and the wife is on another,
Yeah.
then that drives the anxiety, or you could both be from the same side of the spectrum, but that's still anxiety provoking?
It's in the individual. Say I come from a family that requires everybody be like everybody else. and there's no ability to be independent, and I felt smothered by that. That makes me anxious now. Any kind of real closeness and that sort of thing makes me very uncomfortable. So I'm all of my life moving away from anything that feels like it's going to smother me or tell me who I'm going to be. And so I'm moving toward independence all the time. If I've come out of a family where I was too independent, I was on my own all the time, somebody was always intoxicated, I couldn't connect with them, or they were always at work, I couldn't connect with them, that makes me anxious and uncomfortable. I'm going to be moving toward relationships all the time, because being independent or on my own is uncomfortable. I'm going to move toward relationships that tell me who to be and how to be. So in terms of churches, you've got people who, from those very disorganized, disconnected families, are going to be moving toward congregations that tell them, here's exactly who you should be and what you should believe. And they're going to have some intense passion about that because they know what it's like to live in chaos, and it's very uncomfortable. It makes them anxious. So anything in a congregation that starts to feel like it's unclear or not exactly certain is going to be reacted against. Yes?
So what about the tendency of people to be comfortable with what's not good for them because that's what they knew as a child? Because that feels like you're then gravitating towards what you knew as a child, and you seem to be saying something different.
Yes, I am. I'm talking about the most extreme types here first.
Okay.
So for people who tend to gravitate toward what was uncomfortable for them as a child, it's in the lesser ranges of this discomfort. They got used to adapting to something that was somewhat uncomfortable, and they know how to do that, and they've internalized that adaptation. But it's not to the level of, I have to move away from that. The other group that does that is people who are traumatized, who went through severe trauma, and they will continue to reenact those experiences because a traumatic experience gives people an entirely different kind of intensity that they can't get out of, because they do self-blaming, and anytime they address the issue again, it raises too high a level of anxiety, so they avoid it and adapt to just something that's not good for them. And this is probably getting a little off track for you. And let me shift over to the second thing on this chart. The second thing, it says on yours, I think it says flexibility. There are different ways this chart comes up. Let's see, adaptability on yours. It has to do with rules and authority. And again, we like to see enough clarity about what's expected of people in families that they know the rules. We like to see enough flexibility about those things that if the situation calls for it, that can change. We typically have dinner at 6 o'clock. We expect you to be here, but it's prom night. You want to go out with your friends. We can be flexible about that. Or it's somebody's birthday. So there's clarity about rules, but flexibility about rules. Same thing with who's in charge. Typically, dad makes the decisions about this, but dad's not there, mom can do it. Or mom makes the decisions, dad can do it. So there's flexibility. You know who to go to, but if it needs to change, there's another way it can be done. What we don't like to see, again, are the extremes. In this case, rigidity about rules. The rules become more important than the people. Coming from a Germanic Air Force military family, I know a little bit about this kind of thing. The rules are the rules are the rules. You follow them no matter what. There's no flexibility about that. The other extreme would be there are no rules. It's kind of chaotic, again, or the rules just change based on who's around and they have very different rules, and it's just all really confusing. The more uncomfortable it is, either from smothering rules or from the chaotic lack of rules, the more anxiety we have internally about these things, and the more we're likely to react to issues around rules and expectations, things that come up in communities and in families about what are we supposed to do here, right? So when you're having these kind of conversations about these issues and the intensity comes up, it may be because you or the people around you are having a strong reaction to the things that were really uncomfortable for you. If you came out of that very disengaged, chaotic, alcoholic family system, you want very clear rules and predictability, and you might go way over to the other extreme and become extraordinarily inflexible about it. If you came out of that family that was overly connected, smothering, and had too many rules, you're all about freedom and acceptance of people no matter what, and you've got a very strong level of intensity about those kinds of things. Okay? So
it's all our parents' fault.
as long as we have somebody I say in therapy, as long as we have somebody to blame,
Exactly. Just want to know.
it does us so much good.
We're better than parents.
It's just a way of trying to understand our own intensity about certain things and to kind of be curious about the intensity of other people. Because what we tend to do with intensity is we react intensely back, and that just escalates a level of reactivity that then polarizes people more and more. So the more we can get curious and understand our own tendencies about these things, or get curious about the people who are getting intense and not react to it, the more likely we are to de-escalate the level of intensity and be able to understand each other a bit more. If I say to you, tell me, why did rules become so important to you? Well, they're important to everybody. Yes, okay, you escalate it first, but if I can keep myself from reacting to that and remain curious, tell me some more about rules, and did you grow up with rules or not, or what have you seen about that? Well, I didn't have any, but we all need them. We're starting to get some understanding of that. And the more I can keep myself from reacting to it and remaining curious about these things, the calmer I can keep myself calmly connected. Or what's your phrase you use in your conversations? Courageous conversations, is that it?
Yes.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Courageous conversations, it means facing our own anxiety about this might get intense, keeping myself calmed down a bit. So I'm courageous, I'm managing myself, I'm staying connected, so I'm able to continue to have a conversation rather than reacting against or reacting by running away. I'm more likely to be able to resolve the conflict. Okay. Any questions about this particular model now? Okay. I'm going to shift gears here. I know that was a little obscure. I hope it was helpful a bit.
It's very helpful.
Good. This is another model, and this one comes out of family systems work, and observing how people deal with conflict in close relationships. And let me see how we're doing with time.
We have 15 more minutes
Ooh.
as far as but maybe 5, we started a little late. If people
Okay.
give an extra 5 minutes, we can.
All right. Okay, this one is called triangles. Now, this is why I picked that section from the Old Testament. Who are you guys? Ephraimites. Who are you guys?
Big Z.
You live in Gilead. And who are you guys? Ammonites. Okay. So you remember the story of what happened? What did you guys do first in the story?
We attacked us.
They attacked
Because we were oppressing you, and then you attacked us, and then blamed them.
Gets a little confusing. Doesn't it?
Someone got blamed.
Anyway, we got attacked.
We're over it.
We got attacked.
You guys got attacked a lot. I feel so sorry.
I think we're safe.
Do you guys remember what happened? How did you get involved over there?
You were supposed to help.
We attacked somebody,
You
they
were
got
supposed to
mad,
help.
involved or something.
It all gets a little confusing. doesn't it? Who's on whose side and why, and who's an enemy and who's a friend. And this is how triangles work. Triangle is one group has a conflict with somebody, okay? And they demand that their friends join them against this group. So here's the conflict. These two groups have a conflict. What do? They say, you have to be our friends in this. Only in this case, these guys got upset and came back and said, you didn't get in touch with us and we're your friends. And we're supposed to share a common enemy here, because that's what happens when one group can't figure out how to resolve conflict with another group, is they triangle in a third party. And when they triangle in the third party, now this group suddenly gets involved, and they didn't have anything to do with this initial conflict, but now they are being asked to be involved in it. Or in this case, they're upset that they weren't involved in it. So what happens when triangulation occurs in a conflict is that the conflict intensity between these two groups diminishes, because now it's being shared by the group that gets brought in. So think about it as we have a finite amount of conflict, a quart of milk conflict, and we've got the other group that comes in and they take half of that conflict, and this group feels less of it now. And what that does, typically in relationships, is it stabilizes this conflict at a lower level. So it kind of spreads the conflict out. But then what happens is the amount of conflict that's not feeling so tense here gets felt over here, this outside position. Think about it in terms of somebody comes to you and they say, you know, Joe just treated me so badly. I just can't believe how terrible he was to me. You understand, don't you? And you do understand, and you would feel the same way, wouldn't you, if Joe treated you in that kind of way? Wouldn't you? I mean, you're on my side, aren't you? Right? You know how this operates? So somebody says, I've got a conflict with somebody else. I'm coming to you to deal with that conflict. What they're doing is they're trying to triangulate you into their unresolved conflict, because they're not very successful at resolving conflict, or they don't really want to try to resolve the conflict because their level of emotional intensity or their conflict resolution skills are so low that they're either not willing or not able to do it.
So we just talk behind their back.
That's triangulation. Yes, talking behind somebody's back, gossiping, is triangulation.
Are they hoping then that third person will resolve the conflict?
Sometimes they're hoping somebody will side with them. You feel sorry for me, don't you?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody would feel the way I do in this situation, wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm. So you're counting
Let's
on
go to lunch.
Yeah. You're counting on me to
Only if it's Italian.
Only what?
Only if it's Italian.
Only if it's Italian, yes.
But in Stephen ministry, you would just be a good listener and you wouldn't get on their boat. You would listen and help them figure out how to steer their boat.
But that's a therapeutic relationship. We're talking about
Yeah.
intimate relationships and how we get sucked in.
It's not therapeutic.
Yeah,
It would seem to me that one way to look at this is sort of on a very simplistic math level where it's 1 against 1.
mhm,
Then you go and you get it, you know, your backup army, and you bring them, and now you're 2 against 1.
exactly. That's exactly what it is. And, but the thing about this is the person that we bring in is the one who then feels all the anxiety about the tension of the relationship. And in some families, having an outside enemy, some congregations having an outside enemy brings factions together, you know. Or having something else to focus on out there brings people together. It doesn't resolve the conflict because people are avoiding resolving the conflict by focusing on the other thing or the other group. So the point of this is to be aware of our tendency to triangulate as human beings. Couple relationships or two-side relationships are stable as long as there's a fairly low level of anxiety. But when something comes in that adds more intensity to it, then they become unstable, and either people have the skills to calm themselves down and deal with conflict in productive ways, or they will triangulate. They will bring another group in to try to take sides. And people will do this with, well, you all have experienced this, right? In relationships. Anytime we're having a conversation about somebody who's not in the room, we're being involved in a triangle in some way. Yeah.
As you just said, this is a very familiar scenario. Seen it quite often in many different places. But what I'd like to understand a little better, I'm not quite sure about, and I think you hinted at it a little bit, is why would someone do that? Because to me, what I'm getting at is this not being a person that is conflict avoiding and being sort of a problem solver and wanting it. To me, I would prefer to keep it one-on-one and the numbers down. And to me, every time I've experienced this, it always muddies the water and always complicates it, because as soon as more people are involved, it becomes less clear what the real issue is and what's going on. So my question is, why would someone even triangulate in the first place?
Because they've got some unresolved conflict that they're not dealing with, or that they don't have good conflict resolution skills because their anxiety goes up around the issue for some reason.
Yeah, so if their skills aren't real good and they don't like conflict because it creates a lot of anxiety, then a coping skill would be to triangulate to reduce
Right.
anxiety.
And in where this comes up a lot in congregational life is the hidden life of congregations.
Parking lot conversations.
Parking lot conversations or home conversations or displaced triangulation from someplace else, because the more anxiety is going up in interpersonal relationships in any place, it will, unless people are resolving these things, it will come to all the other relationships that they're involved in, and we get interlocking triangles. So if Carrie and I can't decide about this lunch thing, and we say to you, so you tell us, which one should we go to, Italian or Mexican?
Yeah.
Choose sides, be the judge. Now what's that feel like?
In the middle, and that somebody's going to be unhappy with my choice.
Exactly. Yes.
So it seems that C has to be astute enough to see what's going on, if they could be the object of triangulation and in an assertive kind of way, inclined to get involved. So, and how does C deal with that?
Good question, because this is the thing is, how do you deal with this when somebody comes and says, we want you to be in the out position in the triangle and side with me. You know, we men, we should stick together against these women. They'll take advantage of us if we're not careful here. And, you know, they'll have us go into Italian all the time. Right? Let's go to the bar, guys. And pretty soon we start.
Garlic.
And so, what can you do in this position? You're going to feel the tension of this conflict internally. Unless you have a way to deal with that, you're going to deal with it by joining, by becoming like me. You're going to deal with it by being angry against my enemy, which we did earlier, right? And so you have to be able to deal with your own discomfort about, what was our theme for the day again? Speaking about the hope that is within you. Being your own person in the face of the demand to be like somebody else is a very, very powerful skill. Not one that we often do. Because in communities, there is a request that we become like other people, particularly in any community, but going back to that circumplex model where the Johnsons, we vote for Johnson. You're going to vote for Johnson, aren't you? There's a request for sameness that comes out of being engaged in communities. And the more anxious the community is, the more intense demand for sameness that there is. Carrie and I once went to a congregation in a town we were visiting, and we were both ordained clergy, and we went to this congregation, and the time came for communion in the congregation, and the person said, we prefer that you don't come up for communion. And we said, well, we're both clergy and Christian, and reasonably it doesn't make any sense. But we weren't the same as that particular congregation. And so you're either like us or you're the other. You're in group or you're out group, right? Giving ourselves to be permission to be who we are in the face of conflict, when people want us to self-identify with one of the two groups. Which are you, Democrat or Republican? And if you're a Democrat, you believe all of this list of things. And if you're a Republican, you believe all of this list of things. And if you don't believe one of those, it's not okay. Choose sides. And you have to pick the whole platform. Being yourself in the face of that is a very, very powerful thing. Speak of the hope that is within you. Not the things you're angry about, but speak about the hope that is within you, the things that you're hoping for in the world. In this kind of a conflict, speak about the things that you hope for in your relationship with me, not with her, because she's not in the room. Yes?
So then, to tie that together, if I can take a stab at this and answer John's question, when you came to me, I would say, I hope you two can work it out.
Very good. I'm not biting. I'm not stepping into taking on your conflict.
They both sound good.
Excuse me?
You'd say they both sound good to me.
Well,
Yeah.
if they do sound good to you, that's great. If you're being true to yourself. If you're just doing it because conflict makes you uncomfortable, then you're not being true to yourself in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It seems to me that the situations or systems that are set up as win-lose necessarily lead to triangulation.
Yes.
And so the problem is in that initial setup, win-lose. If we can convert that to win-win, then it's different.
Yes. Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Could you say that again? I couldn't.
I said that if you have a system that's set up as win or lose, it necessarily leads to triangulation, because you want to win. So you want to get as many people on your side. But if that initial setup is converted to win-win, then there is no need for triangulation.
But is triangulation always negative? So let's say you're a counselor, a marriage counselor, and
Yeah.
those are 3 people.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that scenario is not negative, but there is that third party that's,
Yes,
You
there's
were
the
asked-
third party, but when people begin to do therapy and they're just learning how to do it, they tend to look for where is the problem. And the problem is you. You seem to be a lot more intense than this other person, so you need to calm yourself down. So the beginning therapist will tend to choose sides in couples therapy because they don't understand human dynamics very well yet, or conflict resolution, or how all these things operate. And so they'll choose sides. Well, how could you ever be married to this guy? I mean, my goodness. And yes.
I would think that, at least in my lifestyle, there would be a critical statement before taking your step back, which would be, I hear what you're saying. I see your concern in this, which would be a way of affirming the fact that this person has come to you out of stress. Otherwise, if you didn't precede your taking a big step back, I hope you guys can work it out, that may automatically make you enemy. In other words, you're sort of saying, I'm not comfortable with this, and I'm not affirming that there is a truthfulness at whatever level in what you're saying.
So it's a good question, and we can opt out of conflict, which has no effect on it. We can get in, that's equally reactive, I'm conflict avoidant, to I've got to solve this because I'm uncomfortable with conflict, so I got to jump in there and do something about this. That's either equally reactive to the conflict, and neither one resolves the conflict. What resolves the conflict is being able to be calmly connected. What's your phrase for your group again? Courageous conversation. We stay connected and have that conversation without escalating ourselves. And when we can do that, we provide the most powerful thing we can provide in conflict resolution. People can resolve their own conflicts if we can stay connected to them calmly and in a way that affirms their value. If we see one side is evil and the other is good, we will keep the conflict going. If we react to it more, we will keep the conflict going. But the more we can keep ourselves calmly connected in the middle of it, affirming the value of the other person, being true to who we are in our relationship with that person, the more likely the conflict will resolve between the other people. Now, you bring up a point in terms of affirming that person. And if we're going to have any kind of impact on other people, we have to be able to, in some way, value them enough for them to be open to us, to get close to us in some sort of way. In therapy circles, we call this joining. You give unconditional positive regard, would be the kind of clinical term for it, but you learn what it is to appreciate in that person, and you seek it out, and you relate to that person in that way so that you form a bond, and you open up the relationship first before you have any kind of conversation. I remember walking out of City Market one day, or I was out at the haircut place next to City Market, and the guy comes up to me and he says to me, well, the country's sure going to hell, isn't it? You've had these kind of conversations. They're not conversations. I've had these kind of confrontations with people before. It's, are you with me or are you against me, right? Now, as I'm walking out, I don't exactly have the time to form a relationship with this person. So, And this person wasn't particularly interested in forming any relationships. He just wanted somebody to be on his side, to triangulate with him. And I said, I have some different opinions about that, but I can't talk about it right now. So I wasn't going to do anything about him because I didn't have time to form a relationship with him and get to know him and figure out where this intensity came from and all of that sort of thing. But we tend to deal with those people by either, yes, I'm on your side or I'm not on your side, right? So being able to join, to be able to form a relationship with somebody is another critical piece of conflict resolution. In this, Pew Research just did a big study, and they put out the results in December, and they said this country is more polarized than it has ever been. How are we doing on time? Because I want to jump into something
We
here.
got about 5, well, I don't know, it depends. I know the kids are already out, so maybe we have another 5 minutes?
Okay.
Okay. We affect each other's opinions because there aren't that many folks who are just true to themselves. We tend to adapt the views of the people around us. And in congregations, we want that. What's your stuff up here? What do? We celebrate God's love and grace. We're a faith community, so we encourage that in each other, right? That's one of the reasons we're all joined together here, is we want that kind of, keep us coming to that sameness in some kind of way. I won't get into more of that right now, but I could. I want to say that we don't form our opinions about things so much based on our own ways of thinking them through. People form opinions based on their reference group. That's why you cannot reason with a person when they're operating intensely out of their reference group, because they're just going to tell you what their reference group believes. And many people have never really formed themselves enough to be able to come up with their own views of things. We tend to adopt and adapt to the views of the people around us. Psychologists have done these kinds of research programs forever. Let me give you one of the most famous ones is the Milgram experiments. Those of you who are watching Netflix, you can see these experiments by Stanley Milgram. They put a film out according to these research protocols before ethics really was more involved in how human subjects review went. Stanley Milgram was from a Jewish family that had experienced the Holocaust, and he really was interested in how could people treat other people in this way. And so he set up this experiment where he had an experimenter who would say, we're doing a study on learning, and we want to see if punishment affects learning. And we're going to do that by giving people electric shocks if they get the wrong answer on something. And so we've got our subject back in the other room, who's really a compatriot. You don't know this, but our subject back in the other room is going to act like he's having electric shock, or she's having electric shocks, but she's got a sound recording of different levels of screaming for the electric shocks.
Yeah.
And you don't know this, but you're going to be getting the electric shocks, and it's very important that you follow this protocol exactly if we're going to get information for this research. So it's your job to deliver the electric shocks. When you ask the question, if you get a right answer, great. If you get a wrong answer, we're going to give an electric shock, and each wrong answer we're going to increase the voltage of this electric shock. And the study was really designed to see how much the person would keep inflicting pain, because they were being asked to by an authority figure or somebody that they related to. And they found that almost universally, the person who was delivering the shocks would go up to 450 volts of electricity, to the point where the person in the other room was no longer even screaming.
That's ridiculous.
And what was the conclusion?
And the conclusion was that people will follow authorities if they think they are in that position reasonably and if they identify with them as belonging to their reference group.
And this is a 2016, 15 finding?
Well, this study was done in the 1930s, but has been replicated in multiple ways ever since.
Seems to be more independent now than.
You would think we are more enlightened and independent now, but people will do what is asked of them if they believe it's part of their reference group. Anybody remember the name Jim Jones? Jim Jones was a spiritual leader, narcissist, sociopath, who gathered people around him who he told them he was the voice of God. They gave up themselves to affiliate with him and join him. He moved them to the jungles of Guyana after he was getting so much trouble with the police in this country. There were no people to hold him accountable there. And he told everybody that the end of the world was coming. They should give everything to him, and then they should all drink poison Kool-Aid and give it to their children, and they did. Because they gave up themselves to adapt to the authority and to their reference group. Yes?
One of the issues that historians have as they study, this is my opinion, but
Yeah.
I think what you're saying validates it, that as we study modern history, that in fact we see an escalation of this kind of activity. And historians will say, although they're often countered with, the day you forget history is the day it begins to repeat itself. So we cannot look back with any great comfort at what happened, say the Holocaust, thinking that we've learned our lesson.
Human beings are human beings, and we will react in the same ways. If our reference group gets far enough away from other people's reference groups, we adapt those views of the world, and we think of the other as demonic in some way, as against God, as epitomizing evil, then we will not have anything to do with them, and we will not have any communication with them. We'll just cut them off, and we polarize, and then there is no possibility of conflict resolution.
And then you have ISIS.
Yeah, we have a lot of things. ISIS, we have a lot of groups in the world who see somebody else, their enemy, as epitomizing evil, rather than getting to know the enemy, loving your enemy, learning who they are, those kinds of things that keep this from happening. Pew Research shows that we are more polarized in this country than we have ever been, geographically and politically, more than ever. And so we're not talking to each other at all about these differences that we have. We're just saying, you're wrong on this, you're evil. We're not saying, how did you come to that view, and what are you for? Not just what are you against, what are you for? And how did that become important to you? That's the kind of conversation that needs to be occurring if we're going to resolve these conflicts. Otherwise, we just dig deeper holes and see the other as more wrong and more evil.
So the question is, so then you're saying the courage is to confront people, say you have a conflict with someone, and they maybe not want to hear what you have to say.
There are various kinds of courage. One is to remain calm enough to have a conversation with people who are intense. The other is to hear them out without fearing that your own position is going to be ignored. And
what if there's not, from their point of view, they're in the defense and they're not in the mode to ever really resolve it because they have convinced themselves of their position?
Some people won't participate in conflict resolution, but the more you don't engage in it by getting intense, the more reasonable you can be, and the more other people who are reasonable can see that, and maybe they're the people who are in positions of responsibility to make decisions. So, okay.
Thank
A lot Next week we'll talk a bit about self and self-righteousness.
This is a whole day today.
I was just
And that's sort of what I was thinking, so I don't think it's
Does anybody need
My son-in-law had talked about that experiment.
Oh, no. Well, and they found, yeah, that it's just like gotcha kind of a thing. Yeah.
Said people were doing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I consider myself a real follower.
Just kind of hope that you wouldn't do
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure listening to you.
She can't just sit back and get your understanding. So she wants to.
She says she's listening, but that's not
Gives them
okay, so I
something
don't,
to focus on, so they're not asking.
I did
She wants to get things.
that's the nursing, because that.
I know